Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. Let us now move towards the third panel discussion session on labor, revolution, and North-South entanglement. It is to be moderated by Dr. Manoj Datto, Alia University. I request other members of the panel, Sampurna Goswami, Orjab Roy, Samuel Sadian, Moitri Mukherjee, and Alekhu Mondol to take their seats on the dais. Manoj sir, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So, this is the third panel or the last panel of today's PSAGS 2023 conference and meet. And the focal theme of this panel is labor, revolution, and North-South entanglement. We have three physical presentations, and one is from South Africa, Samuel Sadian, who will be speaking through using the Zoom. So, welcome to all of you, including Sam. So now, without wasting time, I would like to request Sampurna Goswami to present your paper, and she is currently a independent research scholar. Over to you, Sampurna.
And before I present my paper, I would like to give a context as to why I'm writing the paper. Why is it even worth saying or listening? At least why I think it is worth saying. So this paper is trying to make sense of an experience that fundamentally shifted the way I saw the world. Put simply, the experience rendered me a student of indigenous practices, lives, and life worlds. This experience, if navigated through the interlocutors of the West only, would be rendered unintelligible. It would be rendered gibberish, irrational, and illogical. Words that came my way when I tried to make the promise of this experience visible. I nonetheless stick to it. The erasure, invisibility, occulting, or hystericization, whatever the term we might choose, of certain practices or experiences is the triumph of the European or Western theory, if there is such a universal theory like that, which there isn't. This particular phenomenon, Vivek Dhareshwar, he calls it experience occulting theoretical structures in his article Marx, Foucault, and the Secularization of Western Culture. If we are to think of a post-capitalist praxis, we need to resist the totalizing impulses of Western theory. Highlighting of such praxis allows us to do that. Praxis is the experience I'm talking about. However, it does not merely resist. It also gives us an opportunity to think of an other way of being. It allows us to think of life, a good life perhaps, that has a proclivity towards the in-between of life worlds. An in-between that happens by chance, by an encounter. An in-between that is not guaranteed, yet every situation brims with its possibility. Just like a good conversation, perhaps. This paper is hence a conversation between two otherwise disparate worlds. It is an attempt, perhaps a little trite, to bring to conversation the indigenous and the global West. This paper pivots on a line that goes, Didi ekshate kaj korte moja lage. This line can be roughly translated to Didi, there is joy in working or laboring together. This paper is a limited attempt to attend to the 1,000 plateaus encrypted in this line. It tries to examine, albeit limitedly, the extant theorizations on labor through one of the works of Herbert Marcuse and the Marxian labor theory of value in light of this particular line. It tries to etch out the insights this interaction has to offer that can in turn inform the global discourse on labor. The paper also makes a nascent attempt to speculate and ponder on what becomes of value when labor becomes a close kin of joy and does not remain a register of alienation only. Introduction of the paper. This paper draws from my MPhil immersion experience in indigenous contexts that took place in 2018 to 20. It pivots on a line, as I have already said, একসাথে কাজ করতে মজা লাগে, and it was said to me by Biren Murmu, a Santhal residing in the village of Bashiabhul, Jhargram. This was one of the rare times someone had associated working or laboring with joy and together, and not the more tangible returns expected of labor or work. This one line teases us into, brings us close to a worldview that is productive in ways hitherto unrecognized. The importance of this line comes to the fore when we try to de-entangle the knotted, non-transparent relationship between together, that is একসাথে, labor or work, that is কাজ, and joy, that is মজা. In this paper, I attend to this line by taking labor as the starting point. I undertake this inquiry through a close reading of Marcuse's On the Philosophical Foundation of the Concept of Labor in Economics. It's a 1973 paper by him. Apart from this text, I also engage with the Marxian labor theory of value through the works of Wolf, Gallery Roberts, Basu, and Masumi, as labor as a category of inquiry has been extensively attended to in the Marxian domain of economics. I try to read these few works together so as to trace, albeit limitedly, the contours of the labor argument in economics and how the Frankfurt School philosophy can inform such an argument. Now, while I mentioned Wolf, Gallery Roberts, Basu, Masumi, I also feel the need to mention three of my teachers, that is Anjan Chakraborty, Anup Dhar, and Ajit Chaudhary, because one, they have relentlessly pursued something that is a theory from the South, but also because they have given me the eyes to see the world I see today. So I feel, while they are not explicitly there in the paper, how I see the world and hence the paper is actually their contribution in my life, and they should be up there when I present the paper. So yeah. Now, a little background and context to the line. I mean, why am I talking so much about this one line, একসাথে কাজ করতে মজা লাগে? So this line was said to me, or was said in relation to planting a particular grass called babui. Babui is actually very common, a grass in entire South Asia, and it's known by sabai or shaboi, many names actually. So this particular grass was promoted as livelihood crop in the village I was working in around the early 1990s. The NGOs and also the government had actually promoted it as a livelihood crop. It was coveted for it had multiple uses. However, owing to market mechanisms, among other things, babui slowly faded out of prominence in those areas. Another reason for babui falling into disrepute was the disproportionate amount of labor that went into the entire process of its production, from the time it was sown to the time it was harvested and also processed for selling. At least that is what I was told. My field supervisor had warned me against babui, citing this very reason. He had also made me aware that the villagers have the habit of constantly nagging about babui. In his words, ভীষণ ঘ্যান ঘ্যান করে babui নিয়ে, babui করিও না. He had what came across as an unwanted nag was also perhaps a key to another life world, a life world that eludes us because we are attuned to the worldview of cost benefit profit loss, a life world folded in the ghan ghan of the Adivasi. This constant nagging for me was redolent of an excess that was closely tied to labor. I decided to pursue this with the villagers despite the grass having lost its significance in the larger economic perspective. As we unpacked with the villagers why they were so deeply attached to babui, it turned out that it was something that they did together and it had an element of joy attached to it. Hence, Didi একসাথে কাজ করতে মজা লাগে. There was an excess, a surplus that was beyond the conventional productive logic. Even if babui entailed more work and less monetary return, they were more than willing to do it. This meant that value was not bestowed on the product of the labor only, but something other than that, something that was engendered or realized through একসাথে কাজ and moja. I was hence pushed to take a closer look at the knotted relationship between labor and value, what becomes valuable in labor. I hence take to those theorizations on labor which also address the question of value. In other words, I take to the labor theory of value. I can go on, but let me just go to my theoretical mapping of how to read this line, how to make this line intelligible in the light of the Western theories. Labor, since it is primarily held to be an economic activity, which Marcuse points out in his essay, quite obviously has been largely defined by economics. Within the discipline of economics, it is the classical political tradition that has attempted to make sense of labor in light of value and value in light of labor. It is maintained across all readings in this tradition that labor is the sole producer of all value. But the problem gets complicated when market and or capital enters the scene and exchange takes place. Two problems need to be addressed then. The heterogeneity of labor, because of course the labor that is used to produce a piece of cloth is not the labor that is required to produce, say, a kg of rice. And it's not just the quantum of labor, the nature of labor is also very different. And the second part that becomes important because of market's intervention is to establish an equivalence between price and value. How do you say that if a kilo of rice costs 10 rupees, it is justified? So all these scholars, Chaudhary, Chakraborty, they have extensively dealt about it. And because I don't have time, I am not going to engage with that debate. But what we can say is, in that debate, what remains of significance to us is that they are engaging with the product of the labor as opposed to the process of labor. When Birinda says, "Ekshate kaj korte moja lage," he's perhaps hinting towards the process and not the product. If the product was so important, they would not have chosen Babu. This is where Marcuse becomes important, right? Because he renders Marx a philosopher of being as opposed to capital, this, that, etc., etc. So Marcuse actually gives a theorization of labor, and he says it spans across two things. One is necessity and one is freedom. What is necessity? It's a domain that's marked by alienation of labor because it takes care of production and reproduction. And then there is the domain of freedom that is marked by more an excess of production in terms of intellectual pursuits, science, arts, etc., etc. So we use Marcuse to render Marx a philosopher of being. But from there, so why I am doing this? Because I feel we need to make a move from product philosophy to process philosophy. So we can't immediately make a shift from product to process without bringing in the question of being and becoming. And Marcuse allows us to situate that somehow. And after that, I go to Brian Matsumi, who talks of something called surplus value of life. Why does he talk of surplus value of life? Because as we know, the contention is that capital is taking away the surplus value of labor. That is how the theft is being performed, by taking away the surplus value of labor. But what Brian Masumi says is that what capital is taking away from you is the surplus value of life, not labor. Thus situating the life question, right? How he does that, we can go on about it. And here, interestingly, we can make Shankar Bhuvan Yogi talk to Brian Masumi. How? I'm not going to elaborate on that. We can take it up later. But I will just go on with my theorization. Though Brian Masumi situates the question of life, so what happens is we move from product to being to life. The problem is the question of individual being is still there. I'm not saying just the logic of the individual, but individual being. I mean, you can be in a group setting and still be in an individual being, right? That is how I mark the difference between individual and individual being, right? So there comes because what we have to be careful or to attend to the line, Didi ekshate kaj korte moja lage. There is a connotation of community or ekshate. And how do we, map that? So Pranab Kanti Boshu, in one of his very seminal works, it's called Rethinking the Value of the Left. It came in Rethinking Marxism. He's actually proposing something called community values, as opposed to abstract value, use value, this, that, the normal Marxian discourse. So that is where that is how I map I think these are the theoretical tools that allow us to make a sense of the line that is gifted to us, Didi, ekshate kaj korte moja lage. And this also takes us from product to process, right? Do I have any more time? 1 minute. All right. So why am I doing this? I already said, but let me just conclude it by saying, in making these moves, labor and value has been expanded to be situated in life not so much in the primordial sense, but rather in the vitalist sense. An expanded reading of labor and value through lifetime and the surplus at the core of life becomes important, because otherwise the indigenous worldview will play truant with our excessive focus on labor time, exchange value, surplus value, alienation and individualized values, whether that of labor power or that of commodity. The expanded reading of labor and value also takes us to the community values. Community values, in turn, make space for an engagement with indigenous worldviews. Or perhaps it is indigenous worldviews of Akshate and Moja that take us to community values, community use values, and lifetime. Thank you.